Hi everyone, and welcome to the lecture video Research Proposals. A research proposal is like a detailed plan for a study. It shows what the research aims to do, how it will be done, and why it matters. The main goal of a research proposal is to convince others, usually teachers, review boards, or funding agencies, that the research needs to be done and that the researcher is capable of carrying out the experiment. The important characteristic of a research proposal is to be persuasive. Funding agencies may have thousands of applications, but they only actually provide funding to a few select projects. So a research proposal must stand on its own and persuade the funders that this is the research project they need to put the money towards. Every decision in a research proposal needs to be justified, from why the researcher is looking at the problem they're analyzing to why they're using the analysis methods that they are proposing. Now, research proposals are often reviewed by people who are not part of the scientific community or who may specialize in a different area than the researchers. Because of this, research proposals should be written with the layperson in mind. They should avoid technical jargon that is not understandable to all people. And they need to provide clear language that describes what they're doing in a way that everyone could understand, no matter their area of expertise. There is no set format for research proposals, because every agency or professor can request whatever specific components they require. But typically you'll see the form of the following: introduction with a research rationale, a literature review, a methodology, ethical considerations, and a budget. The introduction and the research rationale section will introduce the topic to the reader. Most importantly, the introduction will set the stage for the persuasive argument. It will establish the need for the study by explaining the context and the reasons that the research is so important to be conducted. The introduction may also touch on gaps in the literature as support for why the study is necessary. The introduction will also clearly convey the research questions or hypotheses to be analyzed during the study, and it may suggest the potential benefits that will occur when the study is concluded. The introduction is a critical component of the research proposal because it sets up the research study and it highlights why it's necessary. It is important that the author keep in mind the audience when writing the introduction. The readers are very likely to not be experts in that particular topic area, and they may not be even someone familiar with the discipline itself. So the introduction has to set the reader up with all of the necessary knowledge and context that they're going to need to know in order to understand the importance of the research topic. The literature review is the opportunity for the researcher to go more in depth with the exploration of the literature. The goal for the lit review will be to provide a comprehensive review of relevant literature in order to build a strong theoretical foundation for the study and to critically analyze and synthesize prior research related to the topic. The author will need to use the prior research to highlight the gaps in the literature where further investigation is needed, ideally a gap that the current study can fill in some way. Depending on the proposal requirements, literature reviews may be relatively short or they may be lengthy. They typically have peer-reviewed citations included, although again, the exact format is up to the funding agency. This photograph here shows an example proposal that was submitted to the National Institute of Justice for one of their many grant programs. You can see that the entirety of the proposal is approximately 30 pages, and the introduction and lit review take approximately the first third of the paper. This allowed the authors to cover a substantial amount of literature on the topic and to provide strong justification as to the need for their particular study to be funded and implemented. Then comes the methodology section. Ideally, this is incredibly detailed, providing the exact breakdown of actions that the researcher will carry out, including what type of research design they're choosing, how they're going to obtain their sample, the instruments that they're using to collect data, and information on the data analysis process that the researchers plan to carry out. By the end of the methodology section, the funder should know exactly what the researcher is proposing to do. This will help the funding agency determine whether or not the project is actually feasible as designed. Obviously, they don't want to fund something that's so enthusiastic that it cannot actually be carried out with the time, funding, and personnel limitations that are included in the proposal. You may also be asked to discuss the ethical considerations for your research. This would include a discussion of whether or not you need to go through an IRB, or if you've already completed this step. You may also need to address any potential risks, discuss how you will obtain informed consent, and describe the steps you need to take to protect the subject's identity. Finally, a budget is often necessary, particularly if you're requesting funding for your project. The budget should detail exactly what money and supplies you'll need to complete the research study, and it may also require a detailed timeline documenting when and how the money will be used over the course of the experiment. Many funders will have restrictions on what specifically they'll pay for. For instance, some funders will only pay for supplies, but will not actually pay the researcher, whereas other funders will pay the researcher for their time that's spent on the project as well as supplies. Some funders may provide money for travel that's needed for data collection or for presentations, whereas other funders won't. So the author needs to be aware of the limitations when they're creating this section. Finally, there are a number of other documents that may be requested for a particular research proposal, including the researcher's CV, a research timeline, and letters of support from the researcher's employer or participating agency. Again, it is up to the researcher to make sure they're familiar with the proposal requirements and to submit all requested materials. I have heard that for many national grants, they receive so many applications that if someone submits their proposal with one missing component, they completely eliminate it from consideration without even following up to request the missing documents. You definitely never want to lose out on grant money just because you forgot to include a letter of recommendation or another requested document. Now, I found a great article on writing a research proposal, and they summed up their tips for preparation as, quote, be practical, be persuasive, make broader links, aim for crystal clarity, and plan before you write, end quote. They go on to explain that a researcher must be balanced with a realistic understanding of what can be achieved. Being persuasive implies that researcher must be able to convince other researchers, research funding agencies, educational institutions, and supervisors that the research is worth getting approval. The aim of the researcher should be clearly stated in simple language that describes the research in a way that non-specialists can comprehend without use of jargons. The proposal must not only demonstrate that it is based on an intelligent understanding of the existing literature, but it must also show that the writer has thought about the time needed to conduct each stage of the research. All right, well, that concludes the research proposal lecture video. Thanks for watching, everyone.